In this video, I'm going to show you how to create a holiday snowman illustration in Photoshop. Hi everyone, welcome back to another very exciting tutorial here at the PhotoshopTrainingChannel.com. My name is Jesus Ramirez and you can find me on Instagram at JRFromPTC. In this video, I'm going to show you how to create a holiday snowman illustration using Photoshop. We're going to use the vector tools found in Photoshop to create this piece of vector art, and we're going to follow along using this illustration that I drew simply using paper and pencil. It's not a very complex sketch, but we're going to use that as reference to create today's illustration. So you don't have to be a good artist to create sketches that you can then take into Photoshop to turn into vector art. If you want to follow along, there's a link to it right below in the description. Also, if this is your first time at the Photoshop Training Channel, don't forget to click on the subscribe button and on the notification bell to receive a notification when a new tutorial comes out. In this tutorial, you're going to learn how to use the Curvature Pen Tool, which is new in Photoshop CC 2018, which makes it easy to draw vector shapes. Okay, let's get started with the tutorial. What we're going to do in this tutorial is use this sketch and use it as a reference for our illustration. Before we get started with actually making our illustration, we need to set up the document a little bit so this sketch becomes a little easier to work with. So currently it's a background layer. I'm going to click on the lock to make that into a regular layer. Then I'm going to change the blending mode to multiply. There's not going to be any change now, but what this is basically doing is making the white pixels invisible. And we're only going to be able to see the darker pixels, the lines. So that's going to help us guide us when we're tracing the illustration using the vector tools. Then under opacity, I'm just going to type in 20 to make this layer 20% opacity. Then I'm going to select it and I'm going to lock it because I don't want to be able to make adjustments to it as I work through the image and accidentally make an edit to it. So now I'm going to create a background. I'm going to use a solid color and I'm going to use an off-white color. So in my case, 91, we'll make it an even 90% brightness, press OK, and I can just call this background. And I can place it at the very bottom of the layer stack. And there it is. We have our overlay layer, and I'll call that overlay. And now we can start creating the illustration. We should start with the easy stuff first, which are the circles or ellipses that are going to make his body and his head. So we can select the Ellipse Tool and make sure that we have shape as our type and white as our foreground color. And that we have a stroke that is black, set to 26 pixels, just so we get a really thick line. And by the way, the width of the stroke is going to vary depending on the size of the image that you're working with. So if you're following along with this image, then 26 would be a good number to start with. Then I'm going to click and drag to make an ellipse, and you can hold the space bar to move the ellipse around as you're creating it. And obviously my sketch was not perfect, so I'm only going to use it as a rough guide so I can deviate from it if I need to. And there it is, I created my ellipse. Now another thing I want to mention, in Photoshop CC 2018, you have the options here in this gear icon. I have my thickness set to 3, which is why this line is so thick. So if you want a thicker line, you can always change the thickness, and I'm using 3 pixels. Anyway, so now that I have this ellipse, I'm just going to call it bottom body. Then I'm going to duplicate it by pressing Ctrl-J, Command-J on the Mac, and then pressing Ctrl-T, Command-T to transform and click and drag it up. I want to be able to scale towards this point here, so I'm going to click and drag the pivot point and place it right here, and it will snap right on the center and the bottom. Then I can hold Shift and Alt to constrain my scale onto that point and keep it in proportion. There it is. Then I can hit the Enter and Return key on the Mac to commit the changes. I'm now going to do the same thing for the head, but I'm going to use a different way to duplicate that layer. I'm going to select the Move tool, then I'm going to hold Alt, Option on the Mac, and click and drag up. And this is another way in which you can duplicate layers. I'm going to press Ctrl-T, Command-T to transform, and I'm going to show you a different way in which you can move that pivot point right to this center point. at the bottom, and that is by using these squares in the option bar. You can actually click on these squares and they move the pivot point or reference point anywhere you like. So if I click on the bottom center cube, you'll see now that the pivot point is here at the bottom center. And I can do the same thing, hold Shift and Alt, Shift Option on the Mac, click and drag, and I'm scaling to that point. And I'm going to actually move the head over to the left. I'm going to use the left arrow key on the keyboard to move it to the left slightly, right about there, and then hit enter. So now I have the bottom body, top body, and the head. Now I can start working with the rest of the body. So what we're going to do next is work with the scarf, and I'm just going to draw that on top of the top body, and I'm going to use Photoshop's new Curvature Pen Tool. Now there's one thing I do want to mention. If you are using an older version of Photoshop, you will not have access to the new Curvature Pen Tool, so you will have to follow along using the old pen tool. I do have an older video where I create a snowman using the old pen tool. There's a link to it in the description in case you want to follow along with that tutorial instead. So if you are a member of the Creative Cloud, then you should upgrade so that you could use this new tool. And before you start using this tool, there is one very important feature that I think you should enable, and let me show you what that is. Go into the gear icon in the options bar and make sure that rubber band is enabled. It's off by default, so if you never use this tool, you may need to enable it. And what that allows you to do is to see a preview of your next point. So notice that as I'm clicking and dragging to create my next point, I get a visual representation of the next curve or the next line that I create. So I'm just gonna delete those changes by pressing the delete key on the keyboard and disabling the rubber band. And watch now that it's disabled. When I make a point, I don't see a preview when I create my second point. So make sure that rubber band is enabled. Then I'm going to start by drawing the scarf, and it's just going to be a very basic shape. I'm not trying to be very precise at this point. I just want to make sure that I get the basic shape, and there it is. And the reason you can't see the line here, this top part, is because the head is covering it. So we can use the shape of the head to define where the scarf is. So there it is. And actually I'll just click on the background layer and you can see the scarf here. And I think the shape is actually pretty good. If we need to adjust it, we can just click and drag on the points. You can see the points if I select the direct selection tool and click on that line. You can see the points that you can adjust and drag around to make changes, or you can use the curvature pen tool and then continue adjusting the points using the curvature pen tool. And you can double click on a point to make a sharp corner and double click on it to take away that sharp corner. And if you need to make an extra point, just hover over the line, click, and then drag to make an extra point. I don't need to do that in this case, but I just wanted to show you those features in case you needed them. And one thing I will do is maybe drag this part down. It's not looking quite the way I want it, so I'll just adjust it slightly. So maybe something like this. What I'm going to do now is create the folds coming around the scarf there. So I'm going to continue drawing right on top of this shape layer. And I'm just going to start creating a shape that looks a lot like the sketch I had there. So as I'm drawing, I can double click on a point to make a corner and then continue drawing that scarf like so. And I'll zoom in so that you can see what I'm doing. There it is. What I need to do in this case is click and drag this shape up above the head and then continue adjusting these points so that it looks like the scarf is coming around the knot there. And it's going to take some fine tuning, so click and drag until you get the shape that you like. So for now, we'll leave this shape here and we'll call that good. Then I can create another shape above the head layer. And this is going to be the other part of the scarf. It's going to come down the side here. And now that I created that shape, I can fine tune it a little bit, maybe make it a little bit longer. That might be a little too long, so I'm just going to move it back. I can also click on the line and drag to create a curve like so. And I'm just trying to get a shape that looks like that part of the scarf coming off there off to the bottom. So something like that. And to finalize the effect, I'm going to change the color of the scarf. So with that selected, I can go into the fill here in the options bar, select red, and do the same thing for the other shape, which was this one here. It goes around his neck. And we have one other shape, which is the one up here. And we'll make that one red as well. And I'm noticing that I'm not liking how thick that looks here. So I'm going to go to this original shape, select the direct selection tool, click on that line and find that point and just drag it in like so. And I think that looks much better. Then I can double click on the hand tool to fit everything to screen, and that's what it looks like so far. Now the scarf looks really thick around his neck, but very thin on these ends coming out. So maybe I should make that thicker. So let me find that shape. There it is. And click and drag on the points here to make the scarf thicker so it looks like it's part of the same scarf, not something completely different. So that's much thicker, and I think that works, and I gotta make the other part thicker as well. So maybe something like that. And now that I made this end thicker, it also looks longer, so I need to maybe make this one longer as well, just so it looks better. Okay, now we can start working on some of the other elements of this snowman. But before I do that, let me just put these into a group, and I'll call this scarf ends. And this one is a scarf around neck. And you always want to name your layers so that you can easily find them when you need to. What I'm going to do now is work on his face. So I'm going to go into the Curvature Pen Tool. I'm going to click here and double click out here to make a sharp corner, and then finish that loop here. I'm also going to click on these points to straighten them as well, and then click and drag here in the center and drag out so we have a nice curve like so. Then I can click and drag this up above his head so that we could see it. And I'm actually going to click on the point here. I don't want it to be so pointy, so there's a little bit of curve to it. And I'm going to change the color here in the fill, and we're going to use orange. So I'm going to click on this icon to bring up the color picker and just select an orange color. And that is sort of like the carrot that's going to be his nose. Then I can rename this layer and call it nose. And I can go into the Ellipse tool and I can work on his eyes. And actually I want the fill to be black with no stroke. And I can hold Alt, Option in the Mac, click and drag to create another point for his other eye. And then I'll use the eye shape for the mouth. So I'm going to click and drag down, maybe make him smaller. I'll zoom in, then press Ctrl T, Command T to transform, hold Shift and Alt, Shift, Option in the Mac, and just make them a little bit smaller. And then start creating that shape for his smile. And I'm holding Alt as I click and drag to duplicate. And I think that looks pretty good. I'm going to double click on the hand tool, and now we have his face. Click on this top shape, then hold Shift, click on the head layer, then press Ctrl G, Command G in the Mac to put all these layers into a group. And I'm just going to call this group head. And now I can work on his hat. And once again, I'll use the Curvature Pen Tool for that. And I'll zoom in by holding Alt and scrolling up on my mouse wheel. And I'm just going to start making the hat from the reference points here, and then I can adjust them later. And again, I'm not being very precise at all. Now that I have that shape, I can start adjusting it so it looks more like a hat. So I'm going to click here to create a point and drag up right about there. And then I can double click on this point and double click on that point there. So now we have a nice curve. And maybe I can bring this point in right about here and bring this one in right about there. So now we have more or less the shape of a hat. And I can keep adjusting it so it looks more like a hat. So something like that. And I'll zoom out. And I'm going to change the fill color to a dark gray. And I'll call this part bottom hat. Now I've got to create the top part of the hat. and I'm going to create it right below that layer. So I'm going to click on the group below it and just create a very general shape for that hat. And what I need to do is double click on all these points to create straight edges, and then adjust the curvature of these straight lines. So I can click and drag up to create a point. I can click on the side and drag in, click on the side and drag in, and that creates that shape of the hat. And maybe drag these points up a little bit, right about there. And once again, I'm going to change the fill color to that same dark gray. Now I want the red ribbon going around the hat. To do that, I'm going to create a shape right on top of the shape that we just created. And it's going to be a very loose shape. I'm just going to go around like so. Very, very loose, as you can see. And actually, I created an extra point. That point I really don't want there. So I'm going to delete that point. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 points, and it created that oval shape. I'm going to change the fill color to red. Then I'm going to use a clipping mask so that I can clip this shape onto this shape. So the only visible pixels of this layer will be where the visible pixels of the layer below are. And when I do that, you'll see that it's going to look a lot like a ribbon going around the hat. So I'm going to press Ctrl-Alt-G, Command-Option-G on the Mac, and there you go. It looks like the hat now has a ribbon around it. And what I'll do now is I'll rename the layer. So I'll call this part top hat, and this part ribbon on hat. So now I can select the layer on top, hold Shift, select the layer on bottom, and press Ctrl-G, Command-G on the Mac, and we have our hat. So I'll call this group hat. There it is. If I double tap on the hand tool, you can see the snowman there. And now that I've made these changes, I think that the top part of the hat's a little too skinny, so we can always come back and adjust them by selecting the appropriate layer. So we have this top part of the hat here, and I can go into the direct selection tool, which is there, and now I can just simply click and drag these points to the corresponding areas. So maybe something like that. And I still think it's too skinny, so maybe it needs to be a little thicker. There we go. Something like that looks much better, I think. And that's what the image looks like without the overlay. So now we can start working on some of the other details like the arms and the buttons. The buttons are super easy to do. All that we need to do is go into the top body layer and make them right above that. So I'm just gonna click and drag and make a button like so. And I want the fill color to be brown. So I have brown in here somewhere. I'm gonna use this brown here on the bottom, and I can use the move tool, and I'm gonna zoom in to hold Alt, Option on the Mac, click and drag and make duplicates of that button. And now our snowman has buttons. So I'm gonna select all those layers, 1, 2, and 3, press Ctrl-G, Command-G on the Mac, put those into a group, and I'll call it buttons. Double tap on the hand tool, and now we can work on the arms. So right above the buttons, we can actually draw the arms using the Curvature Pen Tool. So I'm gonna just click and follow along my sketch here, and I'm double clicking when I get to a corner to create straight edges. And in areas where I don't want straight edges, I can just click and drag to create a curve. So I'm gonna zoom in so you can see it right here. Click and drag to create a curve. I can do the same thing here, click and drag just to create slight of a curve. You don't want it to be completely straight. So I'm clicking and dragging. So the problem that we have now is that the stroke is inside the line. We can change where the stroke is, so it'll look a little bit better if we change that. So if I go into the stroke options here in the options bar, and then go into Align, and you have 3 options to set how the stroke is going to be applied: inside the vector path, in between the vector path, or outside the vector path. In this case, I think that in between the vector path will be the best solution. So we have a stroke of 26 pixels. That means that 13 pixels will be inside of the path and 13 pixels will be outside of the path. So this is where we should leave it. And I'm going to change the corner here. I just didn't like that spike there, so I'm just going to change that there. And actually, another way of doing that is go back into the stroke options and change the corner. When I change the corners, we don't get that spike anymore. So I'm gonna do the rounded corners, I think, is what will work best for this illustration. And that gives me a good shape for the snowman's arm. I'm also going to change the fill and use brown for his arm And I'm going to zoom out by holding Alt and scrolling down on the mouse wheel. And we can see our snowman waving. I can press Ctrl T, Command T to transform, move around the pivot point and place it right here, right about where his shoulder would be, and click and drag to change the position of his arm. I think his arm should be a little bit higher, so I'm going to deviate from the sketch. Then I'm going to hold Alt Option in the Mac, click and drag to duplicate the arm, Ctrl T, Command T to transform, right click and select Flip Vertical, right click and select Flip Horizontal. And now I can adjust the position of the pivot point for this arm and rotate it accordingly and place it into position. So maybe something like that. And then you can hit Enter, Return on the Mac to commit the changes. So now we have our snowman completed and we can start working on the snow that's on the ground. But before I do that, I'm going to just rename a couple of these layers. So I'm going to change the name of this shape 5, and I think this layer is nothing really. I think I might have accidentally created this layer at some point, so I could just delete it. Sometimes when you're working with the pen tool or the curvature pen tool, you might accidentally click somewhere and create a shape without realizing it. So I'm going to work on this arm now, and I'm going to name it arm right. And I'll call this one arm left. Is the arm on the left hand side, and that's our left, his right of course. And now that I'm looking at this arm, I'm going to click and drag it up. I don't really like it so low, so maybe right about here. Looks a little bit better, at least to my eye. Anyway, so now we're going to work with the snow here at the bottom, and I'm going to use the Curvature Pen Tool for that. So I'm going to select it, and I'm just going to hold Shift to create the next point so that it's 100% straight, right about here. And I'm going to loosely follow that shape. And obviously the snow is not really brown, so first thing that I'll do is I'll change that brown to white. And I'll change how the snow looks by clicking on the corner here, making a straight edge, maybe dragging this behind the snowman. And then I'm going to click and drag up in between these points to make it look like the snow is raised. And on these bottom points, I'm going to just double click to create corners. So it now looks like snow, and I need to click on this point here to make a straight edge. And I got to click and drag this shape behind everything else. So now we have that shape there. And I can do the same thing with the other side. So I'm going to quickly draw another shape. Once again, click on the corners to get straight lines. And these points all need to be straight as well. So I'm going to just click on them now. And then I'm just going to click and drag new points in between the points that I straightened to get that shape there that looks like snow. And I'm going to create one more here. And actually, I'm going to invert this one after I create it. So I'm going to trace it, and I can double click on the point now to make a straight corner there. Click here, here, and here. Double click to make that straight edge. Double click here in the center. So now we have this nice shape, but I want it to be inverted the other way. So I'm going to select the Move tool, and actually I'm going to press Ctrl T, Command T to transform, and then select Flip Horizontal. So I wanted to invert it, so I can move it up just a tiny little bit, right about there. And then I can start creating these other shapes that you see here, and I'll keep doing the same thing. So now it's basically repeating the same process. I could also duplicate the shapes that I've already created, but I want to make them a little bit more diverse. So I'm just redrawing those shapes so that they look different. And there's another shape right about here that I haven't made yet, so I'll make that one now. And I gotta move these points around. And actually I'll delete this one. And I have one other shape to do, so I'll do it here. That one really didn't follow the sketch, but that's okay. So now with all these shapes, I can hold Shift, click on the bottom one, press Ctrl G, Command G to put that into a group. And I can just call this Snow Shape. And there's one that I gotta get out of there. That's the one that's in front of the snowman. And that one is this one here, number 8. So I can click and drag that one out and put it on the very top, on top of everything. Now I can disable the overlay. And at this point, all you really need to do is fine-tune the image. Click and drag on those vectors to make them look the way you want them to. And that's pretty much it. If you create an illustration using this tutorial, then share it on Instagram with the hashtag PTCvids. That way I can do a search and look for your image, and if I find it, I'll leave you a comment and give you my thoughts. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them down below. And if this is your first time at the Photoshop Training channel, then click on that subscribe button and enable the notification bell to receive a notification when a new tutorial comes out. Thank you so much for watching, and I will talk to you again next time.